Hi, my name is Angie Wong, and I am president of Legacy PAC. We just came off a huge bus tour across the nation where we went and supported Republican candidates that were running in the midterm elections. We're going to do it again in Georgia for Herschel Walker during his runoff. And of course, we're mobilizing for the big presidential run in 2024. We would love your support and your donations to help us hold the line for the America First agenda and to support the next generation of conservative leaders. So please go to legacy-pac.org. That's legacy-pac.org. Thank you so much for your continued support.
Welcome back to Liberty Hour. I'm your host, Alex Newman. Thank you for tuning in here on American Media Periscope. Our first guest today is Rear Admiral Chuck Kubik. He's a retired Rear Admiral in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps. He established the Kubik Engineering Group in February of 2012 after serving as president of ECC International since 2005. His bio is so long, we could literally spend the next 45 minutes talking about it. We won't. I'll just give you some of the highlights. His company, the Kubik Engineering Group, operates around the world, including contingency and remote environments. From 2017 to 2021, he was actually a key member of the construction team building the 145 miles of border wall in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. He's got a strong record of combat leadership within the Navy and Marine Corps. From 2002 to 2004, he served concurrently as commander of the 1st Naval Construction Division and of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force Engineer Group during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He chronicles all this in his book, Bridges to Baghdad. In February of 2016, he was asked to serve as a national security policy advisor to Donald Trump. Later, he was appointed to the National Security Advisory Council, and he advocated that Trump sustain a peace through strength policy, and he did this in basically every media outlet you can think of, all the big TV networks. He's even been on CNN, although we won't hold that against him. He actually served as a surrogate at the Cleveland Convention and an active speaker during the Trump campaign, especially in his native Pennsylvania. He authored numerous issue and briefing papers. He was an articulate spokesman for rebuilding the U.S. military. That's one of the things we'll talk about today. Also, refocusing U.S. policy. He's got practical national security experience as a military leader and an international businessman. Actually, in 1985, he was selected as a White House Fellow. He served on the staff of President Reagan's Domestic Policy Council. He is currently also serving as the national spokesman for Veterans for America First. Rear Admiral Kubik, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you. Before we get started on like the foreign policy and the military issues, I just want to ask you about Donald Trump. You've been a top advisor for him. Are you excited about his 2024 run for president? What do you think he brings to the table that will refocus policy in the direction that you think it needs to go?
Well, I think there are a lot of us that are excited, but we're anxious to see how it rolls out. My gut feeling is that he's going to take a much more deliberate approach. He has a strong record. He has the stature of an international statesman now, and he's going to have to bring together a team. I know he had planned to bring together some of those of us who were with him in 2016. Had the election gone his way in 2020, and I know he has some deliberate plans for how to get our country back on track. But I think that he's going to, stay in the background just a bit here and see how things develop. But he's a strong force, and I'm hoping that we don't have too big of a fight when it comes to coming up with the nominee, and that we can somehow manage within the Republican Party to get a group together that could form a whole leadership cadre for our country with Donald Trump leading it.
Yeah, there is quite a bit of talk now about the possibility of our governor here in Florida, Ron DeSantis, running. I know there are groups trying to recruit him, but you feel confident that Donald Trump can and should take the nomination in 2024, huh?
Well, the ideal ticket would be, Trump as the president and Ron as the vice president, but they're from the same state. So Trump would have to shift his address to Bedminster or something like that to make that work. But, that's all in the realm of the possible.
Yep. Well, we'll see what happens in 2024, but certainly politics are shaping up interestingly. I know one of the things that you have spoken out about quite a bit, even recently, is the communist threat to America. Now, there is this idea that, well, the Cold War is over. There is no more communist threat to America. What are your thoughts on that? Do we still face a threat from communist governments, from communist ideologies, from communist movements, even here internally in the United States?
Well, I think we do, but it's different than the threat that we saw in the Cold War when we were actually, standing, nuclear missiles versus nuclear missiles. We had forces in the Fulda Gap in Germany, and we had an expanding fleet all over the world to counter, Russian aggression. Right now, the stronger threat is coming from communist China. I just got back right before Christmas from about 3 weeks in Australia and New Zealand. And it really is an eye opener to see those democracies, how they have emerged here after the COVID epidemic and with what's happening in China. You see China in basically entering into every aspect of their economies, both in Australia and in New Zealand. And you see the government basically tolerating it. For example, years ago, the New Zealand diversified where they were primarily raising sheep. Now they raise sheep and milk cattle, and they have a very vibrant milk industry, which now I understand is 49% controlled by the Chinese. The same thing with their logging. You see every port that you go into, you see logs piled, where they're cutting their forests. Now they are replanting, but all of that is going to China. So China, in that one example and worldwide, is working itself into the economies of these countries. I was in Peru last year, and I was up in the Andes at about 12,000 feet, and the Chinese were building a massive new airport right there on the outskirts of where you would enter into the Sacred Valley. And you have to ask yourself, why is that needed? Well, once again, they are pushing their influence into South America. They get about 37% of their food from South America. And when you start to look at what China is doing, it's expanding its economic footprint so that it can feed its people, whether it be food from South America or fish from the South China Sea. And in doing that, they're slowly and surely, in a very quiet way, becoming a dominant force in America while they are expanding their fleet, while they're expanding their military capability, and while they continue to threaten the nations in the South China Sea. It's kind of a carrot and stick. They put an imposing presence there in their fleet, while at the same time they are giving them, good deals as seen by their political leaders from an economic standpoint. So it's there, it's different, and it needs to be countered by strong American leadership, which we had under Donald Trump and which is completely vacant now under President Biden.
Yeah, you actually got my next question. It's brilliant. I wanted to ask you about Communist China. We've had several retired generals on the program just in the last few weeks, and they've all said Communist China is now the major threat to the United States. It is the major threat to the free world. They very much look like they've got their eyes on Taiwan. How do you think we counter this? I mean, you mentioned competent leadership. What are some things that the U.S. government could or should be doing to help protect U.S. national security and to help protect Taiwan, assuming you think they ought to be protected? How do we deal with this?
Well, they do have their vulnerabilities, not despite their ambitions. I had an opportunity when I was a brand new flag officer to travel to China with a group and to meet with their leadership. And the strong message that was coming through, and this was back in the late 1990s, their strong message was the Pacific is a big ocean. We are a Pacific nation. America, you are a Pacific nation. It would be good if you stayed on your side and we'll stay on our side. And that's been kind of their theory, that they should control that sphere of influence on their side of the Pacific and we should stay out of it. Well, in doing that, they control, a major portion of world trade and a lot of other things. And so the weakness that they have is they still have 1.5 billion people that they have to govern, not all of which are happy. And they have to feed all of those folks as well. So if you take a look at a theory, the last thing we would want to do is have a fleet-on-fleet fight in the South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait. But they are vulnerable to ultimately, in my estimation, to blockades in the second island chain, and basically the kind of tactics in the first island chain that the Marine Corps is refitting to put Marines on dozens upon dozens of islands with communications, with rockets, with capability to disrupt and to blockade, China. And I think we have to be looking at that strong as probably where we would head. The other vulnerability they have is in all of these countries where they've come in and bought land, bought businesses, created infrastructure. In my mind, with a strong world leadership, if they do get out of line, all of that could be nationalized and pulled back, from them and just leave them kind of hanging with 1.5 billion people and their investments worldwide starting to collapse. So we have to look at how we're going to counter this in different ways than we have in the past. It's going to be, what I saw Trump do was to flip the equation. Rather than having diplomats out in front, and then when the diplomats fail, backing it up with the military, and then using our economy to try to fund and grow the military, Trump has gone a different direction. He put the economy front, and he had the people there negotiating with these countries to basically get the trade deals we needed. That was backed up by diplomacy, and behind all of that was a strong military, which people didn't want to mess with. And I think we have to go back to that. We have to fight them with our economic capability, but before we can do that, we have to get it under control, because we are slipping, every day in our ability to be a strong economic power if we don't get our spending under control.
Yeah. What do you think about the influence of China in Washington, D.C.? I was speaking with Peter Navarro, who helped lead Trump's China policy. Said there were so many swamp monsters, even in the Trump administration, who either were totally naive to the threat that China poses, or maybe even consciously aware of it, but not willing to deal with it. How do we deal with the growing influence of the Communist Party of China in Washington, D.C.? Is there, I know that's not necessarily a military question, but how is that dealt with? Because obviously it has national security implications.
Well, at one point in time, that was the province of the FBI, and it was Russian agents, it was other agents, it was Chinese agents, it was people in there trying to influence our government either through lobbying, money, or through covert activities. And now we have a situation where it appears to me that our FBI is a bit distracted on where the threat is internally, and that we need to call some of these things out, starting with an investigation of the Biden family and their economic ties to 3 of the world's problem areas: China, the Ukraine, and Russia. That's not by coincidence. And we have to basically, get into these organizations, including, Mitch McConnell and his wife and their family. All these people have profited from China. There was a time, maybe 20 years ago or so, that it appeared like it was a good idea to start to bring China into the world economic system, that hoping that capitalism would basically make them put aside some of their communist tendencies. Well, that really hasn't happened. What it's allowed them to do is to grow these oligarchies still within a communist system. So now we're facing kind of a communist oligarchy that is exercising its capabilities indirectly through these businesses that are here in the United States and other places, corrupting leaders with, quote, business deals that are making them wealthy, and at the same time influencing them. And we've got to shut that down. We've got to call it for what it is and then shut it down.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm shifting gears a little bit. There's been a lot of concern about the status of the U.S. military over the last couple of years. In fact, the Heritage Foundation just recently sounded the alarm. They said in many respects our military is, I think the word they used was weak at the moment. What do you think about where the Biden administration and the Democrat Congress have taken the U.S. military? Has it been harmed? Is it as ready as it needs to be? And what can be done to rebuild it properly?
Well, when I was on active duty and was a division commander, up through 2005, the officers who were the junior officers, the lieutenants, lieutenant commanders, the captains, the majors, they all have grown up in the military, and they are all hardened, seasoned combat leaders after 20 years of experience in combat areas. Unfortunately, there's a layer of very senior officers on top of them that kind of sat out much of that in staff jobs in Washington and have basically become more political than they have become, as combat leaders. I still have great faith in the leadership that we have resident within our military structure. I've lost a lot of faith between the military leaders. So we need a commander-in-chief who will go in there and he will promote based on leadership, based on their merit, as opposed to handpicking weaker leaders that they can control. So we do need to basically strengthen our military leadership. We have to continue to transform our military from what it was. We are not going to fight major tank battles, in open space anymore. We're going to be fighting the kind of island hopping campaign that we had in the World War II. And we need to have a military that's flexible enough to do that. We also need to realize that there's a great threat, growing in terms of submarines, in terms of drones. I just saw the other day that the Iranian Navy is now converting some of its merchant ships into large flat-top drone carriers, so they can actually field a ship that has drones that can basically attack, anywhere in the world. So we have a different threat now. We still have the capability. We still have a lot of very committed military people in the junior officer, senior enlisted ranks, and in the ranks of 05 and 06. We need to bring them into leadership positions quickly, and we need to basically get our military refocused on the fact that it is there to fight, not to go in and indoctrinate people into kind of woke theory.
You're right. It's unbelievable. You spoke out pretty loudly during the Obama administration about foreign policy issues. You actually denounced in pretty strong terms U.S. government support for the Islamist-led revolution in Libya. What are your thoughts on what happened with Benghazi, and now fast forwarding to today, current foreign policy, our growing involvement in Ukraine, where the Biden administration is taking U.S. foreign policy?
Well, actually, in terms of Benghazi, I had been operating from a business standpoint in Libya for, a considerable period of time before all that happened, always staying clear of Gaddafi and his people, but primarily looking to do environmental work and some construction work for the companies I used to work with. And so I knew Chris Stevens. I knew the group there that was before the previous ambassador at the time that the whole revolution broke out. And I actually tried to stop it. And this was all documented by the Citizens Commission on Benghazi, back a decade or so ago, where we were going to try to bring together military commanders under a white flag pursuant to the law of war to talk about a truce and then a ceasefire. And we had that set up with General Carter Ham and the senior general who worked for Gaddafi when Hillary shut it down. And basically they wanted to have that fight, which basically took and destroyed a movement within Libya that was moving towards a constitutional government that was fighting back and forth between the Islamists and between the secular, Muslims in terms of should they have a secular constitution or an Islamic constitution. We had an election there. I was actually able to go into their election headquarters. They had somewhere in the range of 90% of their people vote for a new government. They were going to put a constitution in place, and then all of this happened. Roll it forward when Chris Stevens moved in after this, and they were basically still dealing with arms shipments and other things, and he went into Benghazi. I've been to Benghazi. I had dinner with Chris a couple of months before he was killed, and what happened that night is well documented in Trey Gowdy's report. I worked with him and with Mike Pompeo as a part of this committee, but they were handicapped. They were handicapped because Boehner would not give them subpoena power. And that's kind of the things that we're fighting about now. If you have an investigation going, can the speaker really deny that kind of power? Because if you do, then all of these things are just show. I think that was mentioned by by Matt Gaetz here earlier. So what happened was that the president had been meeting with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on a scheduled meeting when this broke out. The president actually gave the order to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to do whatever it took to rescue those Americans. The Joint Chiefs communicated that down to to Africa Command, and at the same time, they convened a committee of the deputies, as they call it, at the State Department and with under the National Security Council. And Hillary Clinton attended that in person, where she would normally only have a representative. And in doing that, she stymied the whole response by arguing over what uniforms they should wear. Should they go in with civilian clothes? We had people ready to respond. We had planes ready to respond. one of the things I heard, from the Libyans after the war and before this happened in Benghazi was that when U.S. jets, flew over Libya, it basically brought everybody to their senses. They knew that they were in for trouble back then. And all it would have taken was even some flyovers there and maybe breaking the sound barrier to get some sense into these people and to have them hold off before they would try to kill Chris and all of his staff there. So again, Hillary inserted herself into that. It's well documented. There's also a classified annex to that, which I don't know if it's ever been declassified. But Trey did an admirable job given the handicap he had, but he could never close the deal. He could never, basically have any sort of retribution against the people who caused this debacle because he was handicapped by the speaker. And so I think the folks now are looking at this and saying, this is the fight we have to have. Sure, it's messy. Sure, people are criticizing on both sides, but unless we have a strong commitment to fight harder and to fight the good fight for the things that we know need to be straightened out in our country, unless we have the rules set up, the committee set up, the ability for the House to go toe-to-toe with Mitch McConnell when he says, we're going to go ahead and ram through a $1.7 trillion, omnibus appropriation bill, when we could just as easily have pushed for an extension of the continuing resolution till the end of January, came back now and basically defunded a lot of the extraneous spending as we put together either an omnibus at that point or a full-year continuing resolution. So again, I see what happened in Libya being a symptom of what happens when government can paralyze itself by the actions of a few of its leaders, so we can't necessarily bring the strength we have to bear on a very real, immediate problem. And so again, the whole story of Benghazi and all that takes much longer than we have to tell, but it is I think, a point in history where we don't want to repeat. In order to do that, we have to have the ability in the Congress to move quickly on these things and to control maybe some avid behavior, by the executive, branch here, at least for the next 2 years, until we can get a Republican, whether it's Trump or somebody else, in the White House and make a, valiant attempt to regain the Senate. In the meantime, the House has got to rise up and go toe-to-toe, with the Senate and basically say, if they try to pull this again, there will not be an appropriation bill come out of the House until they get some respect. And I think that's where they have to use this power of the purse, and they have to use it much more vigorously than we have in the past. Had we gone ahead and pushed just a continuing resolution to the 31st of January, we would now be talking about an appropriation for the rest of the year. Had the 31st come and the 1st of February and there is no appropriation and government shuts down, we could at least sit back, applaud that we're not spending any money for a change, and just let that work its way out. So there's a lot of things that need to be worked on that don't necessarily fall under the purview of the military, but it impacts it. It impacts all of our sailors. It impacts our veterans. As we look at, from my role with Veterans for America First, we have a lot of veterans who are transitioning from the military into civilian life, and every one of them, whether they're coming in as a sergeant or as an admiral, they have to make that transition. And a lot of them are struggling. They're struggling to find jobs. They're struggling to find a home. They're struggling to reconnect with healthcare, and they're struggling to reconnect in the community. And many of them, have lost connection with their faith. And so we're trying to put this together because we see these as the leading indicators where we continue to have a suicide problem among veterans. So what's happening in the economy, the fact that people would say that we went from 8-point-something% inflation down to 7 something, that's a decrease. No, it isn't, because it's year to year. So when you're comparing it from 22 back to 21, and you had at that point in time in 21 maybe 2%, and now you have 8.2% on 2%, you go up over 10%. If you go the next month and you have 7.7%, and it's up on top of 4%, then you're into double digits inflation. And that's what we're seeing. We need to be looking at this inflation based on not year to date, but 2 years to date. What was it in 2020? What is it now? And you're going to see, I think you mentioned early, we're going to be in the range of 12 to 15% inflation based on where we were in 2020 under President Trump.
Yeah. Well, Admiral, we're all out of time in this segment. I want to thank you so much for all your service to our country, for sharing your insight with us, for joining on the program today. Veterans for America First, Kubic Engineering Group. Any other places you want to send folks out there, places people can follow you or your work?
Well, not so much worry about my work. I worry about the veterans. And so the website is all spelled out, small letters, veteransforamericafirst.org. And what we're trying to do is not only help the veterans who need transition assistance, but to get veterans to stand up as voices in their community, to be the one who stands up and says, this is wrong. And realizing that when they speak out, they may take some grief, but pretty soon there'll be a battle buddy on either side of them. And those 3 will eventually become 12 and they'll eventually become 100. And we need people to speak up because veterans have a tendency, as we used to say, embrace the suck, to basically come down and say, I can work through this, but we need them to break out of that. We need them to be spokesmen. We need them to show leadership in the country now, just as they did when they were in uniform. So again, we're here to help them, but we're also here to remind them that they still have an obligation to their country.
Very good. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate you joining us. All right, folks, that was Rear Admiral Kubic. We'll be right back after these quick messages.